Hi. Okay, so for those of you watching it, we will be doing a debrief, going over a report here for our friend and perhaps a colleague, Chris, and we also have Andreas here as well. So yeah, let's get started going through this. Actually, just before we start, is there any broad question that you have, Chris, in looking over your report?
Um, Predominantly just to do with, I suppose, how I take in information, how I learn. I've come across you from the Second Brain Summit, so perhaps relating to that and how it relates to the Myers-Briggs and the subtypes that I've mentioned in the email, and how that has translated into your brain product. So very generally those areas.
Okay, okay, yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's make sure we are on the report that we want to see. And yes, yes, okay. Share screen. And here we go. Okay. So this is quite this is the most recent iteration of the report. Um they haven't changed too much over time. Do know, by the way, with the button here, you can pull this up and print a PDF version. Sometimes people do want that. There's also a benefit to printing as PDF, is that the way that the graphs are drawn, like in this first section here, they're a little bit crisper when they're
Okay.
drawn as a PDF, and it's easier to see what's there. It's simply an artifact of the way the Google rendering works, that it's not as crisp as it could be. So the report is divided into 4 sections roughly, and the first one here is the engagement record. I would not say that this is the most illuminating or exciting section, but it is one that is probably the most understandable to people, in sort of like, yeah, okay, we did a variety of tasks, and then the bars indicate the amount and kind of activity, and just sort of boiling it down in that way. Um, I know that you weren't able to do all of the tasks in this one recording, that there's a separate recording which has the physical activities in it. Um, the categorically, the results are the same. Like the broad conclusions I would give are the same. Because the second one was short and they were all physical activities, it's a little bit biased in that direction. So I'll focus on this longer one that has the variety here. Just keeping in mind it didn't show the standing up and so on. We will take a look at the other one just to see. So in this part one here, yeah, just looking at what stands out, what is maybe typical or not typical compared for people. And sometimes, especially when the person is thinking about career change, for example, we want to see where was there more engagement than somewhere else. So one of the first things I look at is just the length of the bars overall. Were they very low, very high, or was there variety somewhere in the middle? Yours shows this variety that's somewhere in the middle. The amount of engagement we got was good. Your brain wasn't overly hyperactive where you weren't falling asleep. Just good to see that. We do expect to see, in terms of color, a predominance of blue. This is sort of the background. It's like when you look up at the sky. Well, maybe not the British sky. The British sky is probably not default blue. It's gray.
Correct.
But yes, but here where I live, it's a default blue, and then there are clouds in the sky here and there. So we're expecting to see that. What we do want to see is more bright end of the spectrum colors like yellow, orange, and red in certain places. Particularly for yellow during the eyes closed activities. So this means when you're doing meditation, when you were listening to music with your eyes closed, we want to see a lot of yellow there, a lot of what are called alpha waves, indicating that you're getting into it and that you're relaxing and so on. We didn't see that with you. Now, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong, is you're just simply in a minority of people that doesn't show as much. I don't really think in either of them at much point, maybe just a few moments here and there. But right away, I would want to ask, what do you do to relax? And maybe there are some issues around being stressed and being unable to relax. So
I
that's some.
would, yeah, I would certainly say I struggle with relaxing. I have tried meditation before, but it takes me a long time to get. It takes me 20 minutes to half an hour before I get to that state. So it's quite interesting to see that match up with what my personal experience is.
Yeah, yeah. And for many people who can't do this in the short 2 or 3 minutes, which we give them, which fair enough maybe is not enough time. The usual time for the limbic system to relax is 10, 11 minutes. And that's why many meditation exercises in yoga, for example, are 10 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. If you're taking 20 to 30 minutes, then that does definitely suggest that it could be due to, as you mentioned, caffeination, just overall limbic overstimulation. And there is meditation training and there's neurofeedback training to assist with that. Not something that I offer, but it's out there as a service. Um, and there are probably some with the meditation technique. There are also some ways to augment it with breath work, for example, to make it go faster and to get more in the groove of it. So in terms of then the orange and red, where we want to see those, so that is nice to see that you show spikes. This is what we don't expect to see solid blocks of orange and red. What we want to see are spikes of these. What this means is, let's say you're given a problem, say a geometry problem, and you start working with it, and then your brain gets really into it at one point, and you have this aha moment, and that's when we're going to see a red spike. And then once you have that aha moment, your brain can relax because now you're just going to take that insight and carry forward with it. So that's why we mostly just see spikes. Your brain doesn't need to spend a solid amount of time there. We see this at the beginning of tasks, especially for you. People are different. Some people show the spikes in the middle of the task. They sort of take their time. They sort of look it over casually, and their brain starts to sort of absorb it. Some people actually will do things like solve the easy ones first, or take what's the easy road first, and then as it gets more difficult, their brain gets more active. That is because it is sort of designed like that. The math problems go from easy to hard. The word pairs start off a little bit easier, but then it's also weird for people. So but you do show like your brain does get active, and we really want to see that you were sufficiently challenged during the session. And we want to see it for two reasons. One is that we're trying to gather data on what it looks like when you feel challenged, when you're learning, when you have this desire to sort of dopamine drive to get a reward, or maybe fear punishment, even internal disappointment if you don't. This is important data to gather, because when it comes a little bit later in part two, to ask, what is it that actually challenges or stimulates you? We want to have data to answer that question. So when we do get to that part where it says like, yeah, this is your brain, what it looks like when it was really more engaged and challenged, we want to be able to go back to here and say, ah, yes, there were these moments. Now, people are often, for example, challenged during maths. Does that mean that they really enjoy math? No. So there's some personal discernment there. I don't mind math personally. I don't understand the aversion to it, but I know many people do. And then we pair that up with just the length of the bars, and we see things like, especially at the beginning of the values problem, it's like, okay, there's some interest and activity around the values there. Boy, you spent a bit of time with the geometry, and your brain was moving back and forth with that, both at the beginning and then some spots in the middle, and then really towards the end. Do you remember how did you get the one problem that's just like one sheet of paper and you have to match the letters to the numbers? Is that what you got?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt I got that fairly quickly, and but it was I got 4 out of the 5 quickly, and then the last one was the same. It was the same corner as the other, and so I was sitting there going, it can't be the same one. So I was
Yeah.
then rethinking through that, and then it
Yeah.
turned out it was the same one. So
Yeah, no, it is. There's a little bit of trick with that one. We use two different. The other one is a set of three geometry problems. Each one they're a little bit easier on their own. You actually did quite well. Most people get 2 or 3 out of the 5. fairly quickly. There are people who also get none, believe it or not. They're just not able to mentally manage what it is that they're seeing. But most people get 2 or 3. To get 4 right away is quite good. And then, yeah, to struggle with that 5th one, especially around that doubt. But that does indicate we do pay attention somewhat to how you perform on them, on the tasks, and to do well with that, bodes well. I mean, it's good, not just good visual spatial skills, but cognitive skills. Thinking is not just something verbal. Thinking is also can be something quite visual in nature. And in general, in areas like logic and reasoning, difficult problem solving, people who rely more upon a visual approach tend to actually do better, because words are very linear and the vision is very, 2D, 3D, 4D even. But overall, I see, like, yeah, we were able to get enough data. The ratio of the different colors is good, is what we'd expect, except for the yellow. That sort of internal close your eyes relaxation zone is just not showing up. And I looked at the raw data, which is on the practitioner side of the dashboard, and that the alpha is in fact low compared to the others. So yeah, it would be. Now, what we might want to do is then go and ask, because look at the physical activities, because there are people who find it difficult to relax sitting, for example. My brain does not relax so much when I close my eyes. I mean, I show alpha, but it doesn't relax because I'm busy imagining stuff. So there are other activities, like physical activities, for example. If we look at your second report, which had the foot trace and the ball toss and the pitching, there are people at times when it's very physical will still show a lot of yellow. They're like, oh yeah, I get relaxed with sport. And that's not you either. Your brain did get active around the foot trace, which is not a surprising. The person is standing, they have to control their foot, all of that. This was not a taxing activity. But and I guess the pitching, you were standing for that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so
I was surprised with the. I mean, I played a lot of sport, and I would have thought I would relax more with the ball toss. So it was interesting that that didn't show up at all.
yeah, yeah, it's so I think it's a little, those are the 3 activities we tend to do. There are some other activities that can be relaxing for some people. For example, closing their eyes and visualizing like happy past moments. I wouldn't predict that for you based on your Myers-Briggs results, but that's possible. Some people show that. Yeah, it could also be that the physical activity simply wasn't physical enough. Maybe if we actually got you outdoors doing something like rock climbing. I don't know if you've ever done something more
Yeah,
vigorous like that. Yeah.
yeah.
Then and I say vigorous in the sense that it's not like sport in the sense that you're being tackled or so on, but you really have to give 100% of your attention to that physical activity.
Okay.
Um, having done rock climbing myself, I can say it definitely takes you away from everything else that's going on in life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's part 1. Do you have any questions about before we move on to part 2?
Only really about the alpha waves. What do you see? I mean, most people will probably produce some alpha waves. If you're not producing alpha waves, is that something you can produce more of from, I don't know, say a neuroplasticity perspective, or that's something you can work on?
Absolutely, that's something you can work on. And I would say, especially in the realm of relaxation, this is something that people come to the neurotherapist, for example. So neurotherapy clinic where they do biofeedback, and it could be quite clear to the technician right away. You can also say, when I do relaxation activities, I've done EEG and I'm not getting in any alpha waves with this. And you do so with the music, some theta, so your brain is getting a little bit more relaxed. It's just not going into the space that we'd really like. Although with the music, towards the end of the music there, I see some alpha. In fact, this is sort of, we can walk backwards and say, where did you show some alpha. And it was, yeah, a little bit towards the end of listening to music. There are many people who will show stuff listening to music. You showed alpha actually after finishing the meditation, right afterward. Maybe it's the relief of not putting pressure on yourself. You're like, oh, good, the task is over. Um, there was a little bit during the values as well. So why it would show up during the values sort is when we hit upon words or phrases in that list that might be, quote, triggering. And they could be triggering in a positive way. It reminds us of something we really value and like. And then the body has like a nice spontaneous response. There are some people who are reversed, that they actually get into their body and they have this feeling response to negative things. So it's a negative triggering event. But you did show some alpha in there. So whatever words or phrases you encountered at those two times, those did elicit like an actual felt response from you. And I know it's a little bit hard to see. I'm zooming in. I'm unfairly, I have some experience with it, but towards the beginning and then again towards the end, and then right after again after you finished.
So the values one, that was doing the plus and the minus, was it? And doing
Yes.
10. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I think what maybe happened with that was quite early on, I thought I'll just get the ones that absolutely work for me on minus and plus, and then add them up later and see what's missing, like from a reduction perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When I decided that, that might be when I relaxed. I went, okay, I've got a plan now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, very, very good. Yes. Yeah, that's the other reason. Either it's the relaxation around the task itself, like, oh, we're finished or done or whatever it is, we've made a decision. Or the other is, as I mentioned, it could be something that's triggering, but in a positive way. That might also explain that with the geometry problem, at times alpha can be triggered because a person will pick up the piece of paper and they'll start to fold it, or sometimes offer people a piece that's like a pre-cut out where they can use their hands and manipulate it, and that actually gets them into their body and relax, not because they're solving the problem, but because they're doing something that feels like they're getting into that. You didn't really, yeah, you just didn't show a lot of alpha overall. So except for the end of the music. So maybe if we gave you more time and maybe to listen to your favorite pieces by yourself, do you find that you can use music to relax?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, very much so. And I've used brainwave music before, so it would be interesting to redo this at some point with a different exercise like that, or you, as you were talking about with exercise, where maybe you're more you've gone for a run, for example, and then you come back and see, you're jogging on the spot. I don't know, something that, as you say, a bit more taxing would be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and you did also show a bit of green there, which is also like, it's a relaxation zone, not quite the same quality, but it's good there too. So if it just came down to a very like quick answer when the person asks, what can I do to relax from a coaching perspective? I would say, well, you can work at meditation, but I would suggest probably some guidance around that. Music looks like it's more effective. The physical activity was not that effective with it, and um yeah, you might want to consider neurotherapy, or at least some kind of device. I mean, there are apps now, for example, and working more with those, especially with something involving music.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And there's like more drop downs here about what colors are normal and that kind of thing. But yeah, part two is the part that looks really exciting. It's also the most complicated part. And it's really divided into two sections. There's this part here, which is the visual presentation. And then there is the sort of English translation that comes afterward. Um, I don't expect a person to understand anything here except the broad strokes of what we're looking at. And it's fun for visual comparison when people are part of a team or they come in as a couple, for example, and they see, oh, wow, our brains are very different or very similar, or look how they're very much to the left or to the right. There are some concepts which can be conveyed fairly quickly and intuitively, and one of those is like left brain, right brain. A lot of people have heard about that. Um, if there are people who are more right than left, but for the most part, people tend to be a little bit more to the left hemisphere, which is your case here. In fact, I would say it's more than a little. It's definitely very clear. We say left bias. Bias not meaning something bad here. It's just the same as being, handedness. That's one thing that stands out. So that indicates some definitely more analytical, more left brain approach to things. There are three different views. I'll explain the other two views in a moment. We'll just focus on the big one as this bird's eye view of your brain, and more in the left hemisphere. You got some good visuals, some good verbal skills though in the right hemisphere too. I would say in terms of the senses, you sound more, your sort of default walking down the street state is definitely more verbal than it is visual or kinesthetic. You look like I'm guessing probably for your job you need to talk quite a bit and communicate with people.
On the phone a lot. I'm on the phone
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I've noticed that, by the way, regardless of a person's personality type, even personality types that are known to be less verbal, if their job involves essentially phone work, sales work, that kind of thing, they're going to end up being very auditory. Like that's just part of how it works. The other thing we notice, which we can't really miss, is there's this giant yellow starburst here. This is a stylized way of representing all of the brain regions firing together. They're not magically coming out of the center of the head here. That's just a way to make it presentable so we're not overwhelmed with lines everywhere. And that's indicating all of the regions of the brain firing at once in sync with each other. And that very much in terms of what we're going to talk about with executive styles or subtypes is then the creative subtype there. Let me look at the score for this. 43%. Okay, and it includes all the regions. So it's not this overwhelming starburst. It is there, it's strong. And in the creative subtype, the information comes in and every part of the brain gets involved with that information. The way I describe it is, there's a company, a check comes in from a customer to the company. For many people who don't have the starburst, their natural inclination is to take that data to the relevant place, which is to take that check and send it to accounting to deal with it, is a metaphor. But for the starburst brain, that check makes the rounds with everybody, everywhere in the company, whether it's relevant to them or not. Could be exciting to see the results of our work. Okay. But it also means that the person can at times get off task, can be overwhelmed by too much information or too much variety, will have difficulty deciding or getting things done. For you here, because you also have this left brain analytic bias, you really have these two different things at play. One of them is the starburst, which is getting involved with a lot of information and data, taking in a lot of things, using your whole brain. And that's one mode. And then the other mode is this analytical mode, which is naturally going to want to break down and focus and put things into steps. That's what the left brain is all about. You have very good like goal focus, this FP1 here at the front. Very good. We can click on any of these. This is something that shows up very easily, is known well in the literature. Whenever people make decisions, they select among options. They're going to focus, or they want to focus. They're trying to focus. When they give an explanation, when they push out negative emotions to just be like, yeah, let's just be confident and focus on what we're doing. That there's that side of you also, and all the supporting cast on the left hemisphere of the brain is going to want to break things down into steps and be analytical. The challenge is moving between those two. So when you're in this creative state, okay, you get a lot of stuff that's going on. How do you move that experience, that data, those results? You don't have any results, it's just a lot of stuff going on. How do you put that into something that's actionable and organized into steps? You're going to have that conflict within you, like that's just sort of the way it is, because you have these two different modes. We'll talk a little bit more about that. A third thing which I look at is just to see like how much activity or connectivity is there around the outside of the brain versus the inside. Of course, you have all the regions of the brain active with your starburst. That's great. You also have a pretty decent like connectivity going around the outside of the brain. Not 100%. There's a few spots that are, openings, blank openings there. But overall, I would say, yeah, this guy looks pretty well socially adjusted. Does that mean he's an extrovert or something? No, not necessarily. It just means like having the necessary verbal and visual skills, decision-making skills to, not get yourself into trouble. That in terms of like taking in new information, making decisions about those, having a conversation with somebody, noticing their facial expressions, and oh, how should I react? How should I adjust to their reaction to me? Those are like basic social skills. Getting through those are there. I am getting the sense that now a lot of people in our modern society, their jobs are not physical, so we don't see a lot of physicality. And I don't see that for you either. And that's okay. There are people I meet who do gymnastics, for example, and they do have a lot of connectivity more in the inner parts of the brain. And so that's what I see for that picture. Now, there are two other pictures. I'm going to spend a little bit less time on them, but one of them in particular is very important in terms of coaching. So if we go first to the lower right, which is this sort of slow automatic mode, these are the things that have been around for a long time in the brain. That this is the stuff that we say slow, we mean the automatic waves, what are called slow waves in the brain. But this is the stuff like walking down the street. Your legs carry you down the street. You don't have to stop and think like a toddler, gee, do I use my right leg or my left leg? No, you just walk and you go. What I see here is these analytical skills have been around for a long time, these left brain skills. Also, you show some nice potential for leadership. I notice here are managerial skills, decision-making skills. There's a little bit not just of being analytical, but having a little bit more dominant personality style that's there. Not strongly, just a little bit. But it's there going back a long time. But yeah, the analytical side of you is very much in there. I would say you seem like you had a well-adjusted childhood. Not saying it was happy, but you learned the skills that you needed to. Some people don't. They have very chaotic childhoods and they don't learn what they need to. For many people, the results that you have, they're not going to be as left brain, but they're going to be sort of distributed all over, and people tend to look pretty similar here. We all are raised in a similar way. We all like have similar childhoods in terms of schooling, culturally, all of that. The fun part, the interesting part is the fast challenge mode. Notice how different it is from your combined. So the fast challenge mode is looking at these moments of basically the chart before, the activities when you were in the orange and the red. When did you feel challenged? When was there dopamine release? When were you having an insight? When were you learning? When were you sort of stepping up and being like, okay, I need to focus on this and figure this out? And your brain works in a very different way than it does otherwise. That's typical for people. A lot of people are like that. Is like when they feel challenged, when they want to really do something, they're like, okay, I need to get into a different mode. And they do. And their brain works differently. It very much then you move, yes, you still have like an analytical element to it, but you move into a much more what we call harmonizing style that involves the left and right side of the brain, the back and the front. This is not a mode where people tend to do a lot of decision making or whatnot. It's more of a mode of like, okay, I need to get certain resources in my brain working together. From our company, to use a metaphor, I would need to pull the team members together that will make the best possible team. That's what we call these green and yellow diamonds here. We click on the green. We see, if I can click on it, yeah, 5 different regions in the left and right hemisphere, the front and the back of the brain, all working together as a team simultaneously. Now, what exactly they mean and how you use them, nobody really knows the answers to those questions. We can't say, oh, you have exactly this pattern, it means this in real life. What we offer is that you can see the team members, and these team members will give you a sense of, yeah, okay, these are these are the resources in your brain you're calling forward to do some kind of specialized challenge task. What I tend to do here, instead of dwelling upon the network and trying to figure out exactly what it means, I look for what's connected here in fast challenge that's not normal, like normally there. And we see like 4 different regions that are really quite active. And then I ask, like, when do you use those in real life? And then we find out. So one of them that really stands out, this FC6, notice all this connectivity there. And it's not really especially connected otherwise. Like, what's going on with it? What is it? It's really, a lot of it is in the research, it's about understanding emotional complexity or emotional dynamics in a group. So like imagine you're sitting in like a meeting with 8 people, and you see that Mary and Joe are like not happy with each other. Something happened. How do we understand how do they feel? Like what happened in that situation? The same when we go to a movie and we see 2 characters on screen and they're annoyed with each other, or they're in love, or whatever it is. How do we understand what's going on in the scene? We need this part of the brain to know. Understanding people in a social context is something that your brain is doing when it's in the challenge mode that it's not doing normally. So that indicates that, yeah, if we put you on a team and ask you pay attention to the group dynamics that are going on there, that's going to stimulate your brain and pull you into the strong sort of thinking mode. Another thing that gets quite active in this mode that's not normally for you is this visual choreographer. So this is, in a broad sense, I mean, what we show on the icon here is like people sitting there and they're watching a movie or they're watching a show. And it comes across in things like, yeah, we're just enjoying watching the flock of birds, or there's dance and we're observing how they're dancing together. A lot of it is paying attention to design. So it's not focusing on individual details and saying like, is this in exactly the right place, or is this exactly the right color? But just sort of standing back and saying like, what is the psychology of this design? Like, how do I feel in this room? You know, if it's like a stark white modernist room versus a room that's like very like a comfortable with heavy oak and so on, like those are old fashioned, like those give different feelings. So it's paying attention in this broad holistic way. It tends to be visual in nature for sure. But also, what is the meaning of the scene? You know, that's just enjoying. It could be movies, it could be walking into a space, but that's not something that's normally attentive to you. But we're seeing these right hemisphere paying attention to the tenor of the group, the emotions in the group, the visual experience of the space in this challenge mode, and they're working together. We also just see right next to it, very well connected, attention to visual beauty. This can be body language. It's not just like, oh yeah, this is a pretty painting. A lot of this is paying attention to body language. And then being able to know like, yeah, what's going on with this person based on their body language. Is also the part of us that says like, wow, this person is like really hot, or they're really ugly, or whatever it is. They're funny looking. The way they're walking is really odd, or really appealing, like whatever that is. And then we have one more. You're also just in visual in general. When you're in this challenge mode, you go from being a little bit, you go from being very auditory and a little bit visual to being, yeah, still somewhat auditory, but being very visual. So that means this challenge mode, this learning mode, it becomes much more visual in nature. So maybe for learning to have things, even though it's easy, I would suggest, because you asked about learning, it's probably easy for you to interact and learn from people auditory, because that just is built in, it happens, you're used to it. But when you want to get into that challenge mode of really being like, okay, I'm sitting down, there's something I want to learn, I know there's a reward that's coming out of it. To have that presented visually is probably going to help a lot. And that isn't necessarily a chart or a diagram, although that is here. It can also be, I want to sit and observe what's going on with this group of people. And I'm going to observe rather than trying to interject or to lead them, or even just paying attention to, okay, what exactly are they talking about? Let's stand back a little bit. Like, what are the dynamics of the group? Like, what is the body language? Like, what's really going on here? That's a very nice learning mode, is to stand back and observe. For you in this mode, that's what I'm seeing. And then one more piece that comes up as different is this, learning by observing and imitating others for actions or a task, especially when it comes to tool use. It's like, okay, I need to, I don't want to say fix with my car, because that's very much individual for people. But say there's a device in the office and you want to learn how to use it, like you just stand there and observe and see how they use it. And you think, like, doesn't everybody do that? But some people know they really need their hand held and directed, or they need a step-by-step list of verbal instructions. There's also very good, this is called working through the pain to achieve a result. There's research on this. This brain region gets active when we work through the pain, the physical pain that's involved with something, like in athletics. So that's your challenge mode. Even though it's got a verbal component, it's very visual. And that's neat that stands out. Like you have very different skills in that mode in terms of understanding what's going on with people and learning.
Yeah, very interesting. And even just as an example of cooking or a recipe,
Yeah.
if I look at a recipe, it doesn't work for me. I've got to go on YouTube and see someone doing it, and then I get it. So that's a
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good example of that being correct.
yeah, that would be very much it. And many times people, when you say see something, they're going to think like, oh, I mean, I see it written out. And I'm like, no. It's exactly as you said. You need to watch somebody doing it.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah. I'm not that way, by the way. I'm unless it's something really sort of 3D complicated, like, I don't know, hanging things or mechanics. I would prefer to just read the instructions and go from that. But it's that's the point. We have cognitive diversity. Yeah. Do you have, of course, there's a lot that we could click on and want to know, like, what is this? What is that? What I suggest for people is, yeah, you can read about these things, these drop down things, but the sort of the quick and easy thing to do is to move to part 2 of this section, your top 3 brain networks, and just read about those. You have this strong starburst pattern here. This is often associated with, quote, intuiting types and Myers-Briggs, but there are many sensing types who show this also if they're in either a creative profession, or how they get into flow is they're just gathering a lot of information that's tangible, physical, concrete, practical information, and then doing something with that. For kids in school who are sensing preference and they have the starburst pattern, Lord help them, because the school system is not designed for these folks in particular. And then you do have this left bias here, which is also quite strong, and it seems it goes back a ways in your brain. Like you were very much, you'd say like, oh yeah, he grew up, with developing these skills. It's not just recent in the past 2 years. And you have a little bit of a front bias. It's not particularly noticeable or strong. I just see some stuff that could say like, yeah, you definitely have managerial and leadership potential here. Like if I'm just looking at this, I don't know anything about you, but just looking at the networks here and seeing, especially in this automatic mode, I would even think, you know what, you have this potential for management and leadership, and I suspect you have not been using it as much as you could have in the past couple of years. Because we see in the automatic mode, it definitely has this clear front bias, this very nice connection between F7 and F8. The executive region's very well connected. You have this front left bias here, which is very typical, like leadership clue. And we do see some of that in your combined mode, but not as much as we do normally. So I would even suggest, seeing that, I'm like, okay, in terms of like career coaching, for example, I see you've got these great verbal skills you've been using. You're very good at taking in a lot of information. Somehow you need to move that into something analytical to work with it. When you're challenged, you're probably very good at observing others and understanding what's going on with them, but you have to put yourself in that mode to do that. And then you have this, to sum up, this management and leadership potential, which maybe is not being used right now. And that's it. And there are very specific things I'm looking at, like this line here between F7 and F8, and just like the general front bias and all of that. So they're very concrete. For me, like I'm like visually, this is what we're seeing in these top three here. It can also be at times that with the front bias that the person is just naturally more extroverted and they were born with those skills. Other times it could be the person is more of an introvert and they've learned to step up over time. What I'm seeing with you is you do have some natural potential that's there. It's not super strong though. I mean, there are people who really look as front biased as this. I'm like, are they even using the back of their brain? I'm sure they are, but that's in their quiet moments. And then before we go on to the third section, which is going to be much shorter discussion, do you have any questions about this part here?
Not that. I suppose my only question is delving deeper into understanding the different connections, which you clearly have experience. I don't know if those are in your books or, if you look.
Yeah. And for some of them, we have an idea of what they're about. And I'm just saying, I'm talking about the neuroscience research out there in general. In other cases, like the strong left bias here, we know what that means. But for a lot of other things, is terms of individual connections, for example, nobody knows.
Right.
Like literally nobody knows. We just know what are the contributions of different regions. We know those from things like people who suffer brain damage or brain trauma, or we know those from some like very broad studies about skills, for example. There are some things which I can say, like this P7, P8 here, like this gray line in the back, how these two are connecting. These two regions back here are also involved in connecting with memory. And it's really nice to see that you do have this contemplative reflective mode that's there. And it's strong enough that it's running in the background, probably even as you're engaging with people. There's a part of your brain that's sort of connecting what they're saying, what you're seeing, what you're hearing to your memory storehouse of what you know, and sort of asking, does this match up? Have I encountered this before? What do I really think about this? It's contemplative mode. Like that's also there. It's not super strong. It's not, but it's there. And that's it's nice to see. So some of those connections we know. Some things which are important, the connectivity between the two executive regions of the brain. Those are, we want to see a connection, black, gray, red, whatever. We want to see something. You absolutely, you have that connection there. It's like, oh, good. Because your brain, if it were a company, it has two CEOs. And it has a facilitator that helps the two CEOs communicate. In adults, people 25 and over, we want to see that those two CEOs like really work nicely together. You have that nice black line connecting FP1, FP2. They work fine together. There's no issue there. What the other place I would look at is in the back of the brain between the two visual regions. And those are O1 and O2. So one of them is tracking your sort of like right field of view, the other one, your left field of view. Are those being integrated together very quickly and nicely? If not, sometimes people will suffer from things like dyslexia, or they might just be a little bit slow readers. The interesting thing is in the combined mode, you don't have a good connection there. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's definitely outside the norm. But in the challenge mode, in the automatic mode, you do. So I suspect that, especially it's quite strong in the challenge mode. So that means you just got to put a little bit more mental effort. Your brain, whether you're driving down the street in a very busy, you come to like a traffic circle and there's like all the stuff going on and you're looking for a specific sign and this and that, you're probably putting in a little bit more attention than the average person does in order to make that work. Not a lot, just a little bit more. So I'm pointing this out not because it seemed that important. It seems like you have that base covered enough. But in asking, like, do we know what the different connections mean? In some cases we do. Many we don't, but in some we do.
No, that's very useful to know, and that makes sense actually.
In terms of verbal skills, the left and the right, paying attention to both word content and the sort of emotion or motive behind what the person is saying, those are very well connected for you. Those two verbal regions of the brain on opposite sides, like, are firing in sync. They are, 67%. So on a scale of 1 to 100, I mean, anything over 50 is going to be nice. I'd say your auditory skills are very good. It's not just, as it is for many thinking types, just paying attention to word content. It's like you're also clued into motive and talking with people and knowing sort of like, what is it that they're not saying that I need to address? Like, what sounds a little bit fishy? Where are they hesitating? What did they show extra curiosity about? It's not just analytical, but you got that figured out. Like, that's a nice strong thing there. Yeah, so those are examples of things that we can pick out and know what they mean. I want to see what this is here. Yeah, precise. Okay, so we have that. Is this? Yeah. So this is an example of something which is very specific. This is the last one I'll show, that we do know what this means, even though it's between two sort of like seemingly random regions. These are the two regions of the brain most involved in processing speech, like words. And it involves other stuff, but in terms of the word selection, actually hearing the words that are said, it also involved with some mental planning and reasoning. They said this and then they said that. Okay, so A is leading to B and then B is leading to C. Like, you have a nice strong connection there. And those are just, we know two regions of the brain that are most involved with language. And if many people do have a decent connection there, and if they don't, then they may struggle in school, for example, like writing a paper or giving a speech or something. They're going to struggle with those things. Because in giving a speech, we not only have to produce the words, we have to figure out what we're going to say and in the right order to say them. You don't have any problem with that. Historically, I don't know, but that's for you. That's just something that we happen to know how that works. For part 3, this is we just want to focus on some stuff that's in the workplace. This originally got started with a colleague of mine in India, and he wanted stuff to use with the business and engineering graduate students who were looking for career counseling. And we've tried a variety of pie charts. I've shifted recently to the current 2 pie charts that we have because they are the most defensible, and just in terms of like, if a neuroscience person asks me, like, what is your data behind this? I'm like, this is very straightforward. No worries. We also introduced left and right brain right away because if people know anything about the brain, that's what they've heard. And just to say, yeah, you have more left analytic brain. It's sort of like, 2/3. It's a 2/3 more analytic, 1/3 is holistic. We'd like to show people they can do both. There's no such thing as like a purely left brain person. Some people, it can be as extreme as 90%, 10%. It can also be 50-50. Like, it varies tremendously.
What do you sorry to interrupt, what do you think about, so I'm left-handed, and the common question is, or if you're left-handed, you're right-brained, and clearly I'm not. So where do you sit on that?
Yeah. So it's funny, right? I got that when I first started this research years ago, I was told, oh, like exclude left-handed people even from your research. They're going to mess up your data. And then I talked to an actual person who does EEG, I mean, at the university, and he's like, "Oh, that's nonsense." He's like, "They're not very different from anybody else." Um, he said, "Yes, in a few specific things, they can work out differently. Specifically in these regions right here." He said that they be more connected or more active because those are parts of the brain that control the body and the hands. Um, you actually don't show any. Yeah, you're clearly. I wouldn't even guess that you were left-handed from this.
Where
Uh,
you were touching on your head, was that P2, P3, P4?
it would be C4.
Okay.
So this is the body movement, and then F4. These two regions here are the ones that would be, as for a left-handed person, we would expect to see some extra connectivity here. It doesn't mean a lot of connectivity or whatever. We would expect to see some extra. I don't see that with you at all in any of the three modes here. I wouldn't guess that you were left-handed. What I would say is where the connectivity, where the correlation can be, where the impact is for being left-handed is, especially for people who score as sensing thinking types in Myers-Briggs, not a lot of them have the starburst pattern. You have this like holistic creative way of thinking. So on the map, yeah, you've got this left hemisphere stuff. It looks like you're a right-handed person. But then you have this, what's really strong is this whole brain thinking, which when we read about the whole brain thinking, that's a bit like a quote right brain kind of person. It's just that the way that people think about left and right brain in the general population is not, is very sort of stereotypical. It's not literally on the left and right hemispheres. You do have this holistic starburst mode, which can be very creative and really accounts for lots of different things that are going on in the environment. And that is where this quote right brain comes in. It's just this holistic way of being is very strong and is not common. I mean, it happens among sensing thinking types, but it's not common. Yeah. And by the way, I should mention that in terms of what the hemispheres do, it is very well established in neuroscience. Yes, the left hemisphere regions are more analytical and linear and so on. The right hemisphere regions are more sort of visual, spatial, and attentive to emotions and that kind of thing. But most people are not just like, yeah, you wouldn't say like, oh yeah, left-handed people are right-brained or something. That's not the case. Yeah. So yeah, there's just these works out left and right hemisphere, and then in terms of, so this is something sort of there isn't like a natural vocabulary out there for this, but the way we talk about formal, structure, traditional, it means it's like, yeah, can you get on well in like a formal company structure? That doesn't necessarily mean you like it or whatever, but can you get along well on that? The informal dynamic alternative is the person, if a person was majority informal dynamic alternative, they probably would not be able to work a 9-to-5 job in a company. They would be just like, I don't like hierarchy. I don't like fixed working hours. They can't hold that down. They're going to have a lot of difficulty with that. You give them creative projects or something where they're motivated, at least, then they can do very well on their own or in some kind of informal setting. Most people here, the reason we're going to do this is because I encounter a fair number of people who come, they have this question of like, I've been working in this company, blah, 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 for a while. I have a cubicle. I have standard hours. I'm not happy with it. I'm like, let's find out why. Is it because you're under challenged? Is it because you're using the wrong skills? Or is it because you actually need a more informal environment? And sometimes it can be that. So that's what this piece of information is about. Always people have some element of informality and some formality, like everybody can stretch somewhere. Had somebody recently who was like over 91% formal structured. That, I mean, that's what he needs and that's what he likes. Other people, yeah, they just need this working on their own kind of thing. Yours is actually, even though it looks like it's majority formal structured, I would say in terms of what we see among people, you're in the middle. Like you can do both. And then we sum all of that here with executive style. It's only going to show the first ranked style that's here. And we give two pieces of information. One is just what are the characteristics of other people who also show your kind of brain in terms of the starburst pattern. That doesn't mean all of these are you. It's just saying like this is what is typical among people who have brains like yours. And then this other part on meeting needs is, okay, if this is your brain style, what are like a dozen things that would be helpful for you, both to make the most of the style and also to balance out some of the maybe downsides of it. So for example, making sure in your job that you have opportunities to be creative, and that you can also have some flexibility, but it's also suggesting some things that will help you. So for example, number 4 here, to avoid feeling overwhelmed, divide larger tasks or goals into smaller manageable parts. This helps maintain interest and show progress. So breaking down tasks, because otherwise the creative subtype can feel overwhelmed. Valuing quality and consistency. This was something, by the way, very interesting. I didn't point it out before in part 2, but in your normal combined mode, walking down the street mode, you pay attention quite a bit to quality and consistency. Like that, not a huge amount, but it's important. In your challenge mode, that's actually completely shut out. You enter this mode where you're not, and it can be debilitating. Quality and consistently, it's like the person, my mom suffered from this. She'd want to write something like an article, and then she'd be like, oh, that's not the right word. She would get stuck on the technicalities. It's not perfect, and then she would never finish the task. People can become immobilized by wanting it to be perfect quality and perfectly consistent. And what's interesting is in your challenge mode, you just turn that off. It is not connected to the other stuff at all. And that's actually really great. Like, because the suggested style, when people are doing something creative, or even if it's for work and it's like a big sort of compelling project, it's a challenging project, I would be just like, spit it out. Don't try and edit it as you go. Just spit it out and then do a second pass where you go down and you structure it and you edit it and that kind of thing. Don't monitor yourself as you go. Otherwise, you'll never get it done. So I would say that that's a really good plus for you.
That's really interesting. Where was that on the chart? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, because especially you'd want to see this if you're going to be doing, I mean, anybody doing coaching, you want to see this. So what we see here normally in the big view is we see PO7 is quality controller. It's not at the hub of everything, but it's connected, and a lot of people have this. A lot of people pay attention to details. It's what we're raised to do. Is your spelling correct? Does this sentence rhyme with that sentence? Is the pixels aligned, whatever it is? Are the numbers accurate? So that's there. Then we go over the fast challenge mode. That same region PO7 is connected to exactly nothing. You just bypass it. And from my personal point of view, when people are in a challenge mode, unless your job is to do quality control, I'm like, when you're in challenge, I'm like, that's great. That means you're able to stretch into your right hemisphere and you're able to do all of this stuff over here, paying attention to body language, paying attention to like group dynamics, even here learning by observing. You're not getting stuck on details. And I would say that's probably, if you notice yourself in a situation getting bogged down with like, is this the correct detail? That means you're not in your best challenge mode. It's
That
like,
makes a lot. That makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of
yeah,
sense.
that is
That
the
when you
leverage point.
in the fast challenge, I go into that'll do, that'll do.
Yeah, that absolutely, yes. Yeah. And I think it's absolutely fine because in many situations, one that will do actually does do. And second of all, we often have the opportunity to like go back and clean it up, afterward. And what is it allowing you to do when you let go of that, as well as let going of the goal focused decision making up here, all the stuff that's in front, that you're really able to move into those left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, sorry, these right hemisphere things,
Yeah,
and just like have this nice like team of people in your brain working together.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and then in terms of how we would rank the other ones, these we show the other three. They're not in any special order. We do have plans. It's on the to-do list to give people a more precise, more personalized executive style here that will take their first and second and combine them together. So people will get like a nice combo. That's more personalized, or at least show a little chart or something like that. Otherwise, when people ask, I tell them, like personally or in an email. For you, creative is first. I would say harmonizing is second, because you do harmonizing when you're in that challenge mode. You also have dominance as third, because that's sort of naturally in your pattern long term. And then normalizing, it's funny, I would say normalizing last, but in a sense, you cover normalizing because you have this analytical side, which is very accepted as the normal way of doing things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're not like the classic normalizing, which is what you're going to see in the book and the chapter, which is all the regions of the brain nicely, just evenly connected with like in rows and fields, like on a farm, or checkerboard. Like that's not you. And that's fine. That style is very much great for that person, Jane, who works in accounting. That works really well for those people, have routine day in and day out. They go through all of their steps. And we need those people, but that's not you.
Yeah. And so my style would be more, I don't know, like a tree with branches going out and
Yeah.
figuring out without knowing where you're necessarily going at times.
Yes. Yeah. Because you have that creative mode. I know some of it you expressed at times, like how do we go from that creative interacting, a lot of stuff is coming in and going out, to like actually getting settled with something. That analytical part of you is going to want to pull things over into the left brain and like, yeah, let's make a rule or a step out of it, or like let's clarify it. I mean, that's a task. I mean, that's personally why I like the Myers-Briggs stuff, because it talks about mental functions. And if you have sensing and thinking, the sensing part of you is like, oh yeah, there's all this really cool stuff going on. And then the thinking part is going to be, yeah, now I want to analyze it and make something useful out of it, or define it in some way. Um, I suspect though, I mean, they work well enough. Otherwise, you have gotten to where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're all within the normal range of things. But yeah, it is important to know one's style and to know that you can flex into a harmonizing style of working with others. Normally, I think of harmonizing as one-on-one, but I would almost say that your harmonizing style is probably good with observing small groups of people as well. Yeah, in fact, it may be more observing the group than it would be just sitting there directly face to face with the person. Not that you can't do that too, but I see that little bit of nuance with you. That you've got some good group understand and observe what's going on, like when your brain can get into that mode. And then when you can step up and be more dominant when you need to.
Yeah.
I see that. Yeah. And then the last part here is these 6 best developed skills out of the 32. what are just the regions that are most well connected. These are the results of pretty much the last 2 years of whatever it is you've been doing. And so a person might say, well, I don't know if this is always me. And it's like, it's not going to always be you. Like, this is just reflecting the past couple of years. Precise speaker, so having to do a lot of paying attention to word content, talking with people, speaking what's on your mind, asking, can you tell me the key idea and how can we speak more effectively? Those are all, sort of typical questions people may ask that represent using this part of our brain. Sensitive adjuster is, yeah, it says visual detail. It's also verbal detail and factual detail. In fact, I should probably modify this and improve it at some point, because it does involve like facts and not just visual details. It's very much just like responding to what's in front of us in terms of visual and verbal detail, and making sure that conforms to something. Conforms to our goal in the conversation, conforms to making the person happy. In a romantic situation, it can also show up. People, when they're embarrassed, this also shows up. But then it's also involved with things like committing facts to memory. Oh, this is something I need to remember. So making sure we have that factual detail that's there. Yeah, needing to adjust what's going on to the other person and to the task in front of us, the parameters of the task in front of us. Quality controller, this is great. Like, you have this strongly on a lot of the time, and then when you go to the challenge mode, it's totally not there. But for the workplace, this is often very much needed. I mean, it's expected. I mean, imagine you receive an email with a bunch of spelling mistakes. How do you feel about that person? I mean, that's the way it is. Can't balance the budget at the end of the month. Gosh, what am I doing wrong? A lot of people have this in their top 6. That's the world we live in. Focus judge, that's one of our 2 decision-making regions here. Staying focused, making decisions, selecting among options, being results-oriented, being sharp, screening out distractions. It can be overused at times. For you, I don't see a lot of overuse. You have good connectivity. I wouldn't say like you're this loosey-goosey brainstorming open-ended person. I mean, you look like the person who wants results, who's going to say, okay, like how do we stay focused? But you have both executive regions, just this one is stronger, making decisions, focusing on outcomes. What's the goal? How can we focus for success? Like, those are good questions for somebody who prefers this region. Meta analyst, this is so important. I think for people who do it, they take it for granted. And for everybody else, it's like somebody says something to you, and does that actually jive with what they said before, or what you know from evidence or fact? Like, how do things actually match up? It says sort truthful statements from lies. It isn't necessarily, the person may not be lying, they just may be inconsistent or not paying attention to what they're saying. But it is an important part of understanding when we're interacting with people, if we're in a decision-making position, we're evaluating what they're saying, like, does everything that they're saying and doing in the evidence, like, does that actually line up? And this, in the research studies, they do things like they show a person a piece of paper, this person has said this before, and here's some evidence, and then they put that aside and they go to part 2 of the experiment, where they're going to hear the person talking about something, and they're like, how much does this actually match? Did you notice what didn't match or not? And so it's a very, very important skill. Misstatements, noticing those, but not everybody has it, which is, for the people who do, it's a surprise. Sometimes, yeah. Emotive listener, this is your last thing. I would say for ISTP and ISTJ. ISTJs sometimes have this well developed, in part because ISTJ has the side of themselves that is a little bit squishy at times and sentimental, and they also can get annoyed easily when they're being badgered and that kind of thing. So this part comes in for that. For ISTP, it's more of a practical skill. I'm listening to this person. What is their motive in terms of what do they need right now? What are they emphasizing? What is the tone of this person? Also appreciation for music for both of them. So this is, and it just sounds like for your job, you need to have developed this.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a few things that we have are what's next. And at the beginning, we also talked about typical applications. We just remind the person, here are 5 things to like go back and review. Where did you show orange or red in your chart, for example? You might want to do those tasks more often. Unless you already feel overwhelmed in life, then maybe not. But in terms of challenge. And we just sort of step through those. Did you show yellow alpha waves? Especially those are indicative of relaxation. That's like a helpful, productive relaxation. Theta is also fine for relaxing, but that's just like a generic, yeah, I'm just lying here watching TV kind of relaxing. That's not the kind we want to encourage. Television is not actually rejuvenating. And then sharing is sort of like many people want to know, how does this compare to other people in my team or something like that. And reminding them this was not an IQ test. Many people are quite relieved to see that. They're like, oh yeah, my brain is very different from these other people's brains on my team or my partner, but I'm fine. And then the neuroplasticity part. We're putting together a document right now and I'm talking to 2 people in the US right now who do neurotherapy as well as general coaching. Because we're getting a lot of questions around this. People want to know, how can I change my brain? I can give you and anybody some general statements. Like habit building is the #1 way to do it. Even if you can't keep at your habit every single day, just keep trying. The research shows that trying actually matters more than the day-to-day consistency. It's just like you stand back up and you try again. Habit building can take, for easy things, can take 3 weeks. For harder things, it can take 3 months. But those are the two, that's the range that's there. And in the whole scope of a person's life, 2 years from now, or even a year from now, 6 months from now, if a person looks back and they just tried something for 2 months, they will have noticed a change. Like, it's very worth it. The same with exercise, going to the gym. People can achieve amazing results, not in a few days, but they'll start to see in 2 or 3 weeks, and they will have seen results in 2 to 3 months, and they will have built up a habit after 2 to 3 months. That when they stop, they'll feel, oh, something is wrong. I don't feel good because I stopped going to the gym. The same as with the brain. I would suggest for people who want a career change, they're not happy with what's going on, I would say either look at your executive style, your subtype. Does that match what you're doing? If not, you want to change what you're doing to make a match. If it does match and you still don't like what you're doing, that means like, yeah, you've like adapted your brain in the last 2 years to something that doesn't suit you. So let's look at the things that you can do in your challenge mode. What are the regions of the brain you're using in your challenge mode you aren't using normally? And we went over 4 of those for you. So I would be like, yeah, then we would suggest somebody who is more doing these stuff that's related to a group and understanding what's going on with the group and with people, and a little bit more managing people as opposed to, like, say, cubicle work or something like that. And maybe not just over the phone, but I would suggest you're much more visual in the in-person stuff, and you want to watch it and try it and see. And so it would be more hands-on and more visual and less stuff that's just like over the phone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I very much enjoy that, sitting watching a small group of people. That might be a board meeting where you're analyzing how people, for example, that I definitely enjoy, and I don't get enough out of that. As you say, particularly if you work from home and you're just, you're on the phone with different people, which is I enjoy,
Yeah.
but you said there immediately, observing lots of people and spending time doing that, I do enjoy.
Yeah.
So I should think more about how I can incorporate that. And that was a big question I was going to say, not just for me, but from a coaching perspective, it's great when you get all this information. It's what you then do with it afterwards, which I suppose brings up choice really for the person. So it is what that individual wants.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I would originally think, well, there'll be a framework, but actually with different types, some people will like frameworks, some people won't. You've mentioned the habit, I think that's great. Is it a, is it a, just a day-to-day awareness that would sort of fall into the habit sort of side of things? Or I suppose I'm looking at it from the strengths and weaknesses point of view. So
Mm-hmm.
it's nice when you find out what your strengths are. Maybe you just focus on those, and that's a choice you can take. Or, there's this debate about, okay, here's my weaknesses. Do I actually need to work on those? If I do, great, build the habit, or do I just ignore that because I'm just going to stay with my strengths? So I see quite a lot of nuance in how you take this forward from a coaching and an individual's point of view.
Yeah, yeah, there definitely is a lot of options, and so taking the time to find out where the person is coming from, where are their goals, where are their sore points, things that are not happy in their life, satisfying. What they were doing 10 years ago can also be very interesting, because that can many times still be a resource in the brain. The person just hasn't been using them recently, and they can go back in time in a way and like pull that out of themselves just by getting into a new situation. I mean, I saw that somebody recently had moved into a much more technical job he's been doing for the past 10 years. He was doing like theater and singing before that. He feels like his current job stuff, even though it's nice, is with people, but it's not creative. And I'm like, okay, and this, we were on stage. So I was and this was in person, not just over Zoom. And I was able to lead him through an hour's worth of exercises that completely brought out that starburst and creative side of him. And I'm like, see, you may have quit that 10 years ago, but it is still there. It is still in you. Another thing I suggest is what I call secondary strengths. So for the most part, I agree for the most part with the strength finder approach. Like, look at the person's strengths, make sure that they're doing them, working from their strengths, unless the weak point is really a sticking point for the person. I'm like, make sure it's covered, but that doesn't mean you have to personally cover it. It's like, okay, you feel like you're not very good with people. Do you need to take a whole bunch of training and be working with people from now on? No. Do you want to, keep some like nice habits in mind for dealing with people? Like for me, remembering things like, oh yeah, how was your week been before starting into the conversation, the task, little simple things like that. I think those are good things to cover. Um, and then the secondary strains are things that were on the diagram there in part 2, but were in gray. Those are slower. They come up, they can be there, but they're not in the back and forth of conversation. The person needs to have a timeout in order to give them this opportunity. So the way I phrase it is like, how do we say like what's red in the chart? Like the fastest, most important regions. Those are the things that are present and active when we're doing that, what I call the 3-second rule. We're doing back and forth in a conversation. We're talking, we're at a party, we're at a business, or whatever it is. We have those 3 seconds to respond before it seems weird. And so we're using the parts of the brain that can respond within 3 seconds. But there are other parts of the brain which are strengths, but they take 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute to come up. I know from experience, this happens to me all the time. I see an email, I want to quickly get it out of the way. I just type a response and send it. And then literally 30 seconds later, I'm like, oh, there's one line I should have added. That was usually about something nice that would make the person feel a little bit more comfortable, whatever it is. I'm like, yeah, even though I don't like to keep things open, it helps to just give myself an extra minute before pressing send, literally 1 minute. And I would say those timeouts of giving your brain that 1 minute, all of a sudden it can bring in 5-10 more resources that would not have been there before. It's just like right on the edge. And those little, not even big timeouts, it's not a 10-minute timeout, it's a little timeout. Little timeouts are worth so much. The big timeout also useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So
And then
sorry, go on.
I would add one more thing, and then there are weaknesses, which are things like, okay, you don't show a lot of yellow alpha waves when you're doing these eyes closed activities. There's something in your life which is unsatisfying, you feel stressed out and so on. Like, we actually do want to work on that. That is something to work on.
Yeah, and that can be with neurotherapy, can it? For example.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'd be interested. And to learn more about this, is it the Decode book or is it a different book that's covers this?
The decode your personality, a lot of that really it was targeted for the Myers-Briggs crowd and wanting to get more specificity around that. So you're going to see quite a bit about your subtype. And then there are later, at the end of each chapter, there's some sections on when we get into the stress neurotic zone, what does that look like? Or maybe there's some hidden aspirations. What are the, like, we would be surprised to discover, oh wow, that would really be satisfying if I was doing this in my life. And those are very short sections, but then as you get towards the end of the book, there are whole chapters devoted to those. So there's a whole chapter about the neurotic zone. There's a whole chapter about hidden aspirations. And so I would say those are worthwhile, whether you settle on, and I think now that we see that you're subtype, you can go read creative subtype with a little bit of harmonizing, a little bit of dominant for ISTJ and for ISTP, see which one fits better. I have my thought on that. If you want more help with it, I can give my personal feedback. I don't try and like force the person into, I don't want to.
I'd be interested whether that's on another call or now. I don't mind, but I'd be interested in your personal feedback. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I get the sense more likely ISTP, more STP-ish than STJ. But that's just from our 1 hour of this isn't even a casual interaction, but it's just from our feedback there. Yeah. But just know that in the chapter, after you read about the subtypes for each type, let's say ISTP, and then you get to this little 2-page spread and you're like, well, this is interesting, but it's so short and I don't know how to act on this. That's fine. Just know later in the book, after the 16 type chapters, there's sections, the whole chapter about the neurotic zone and a whole chapter about hidden aspirations. And those are things that can be useful for coaching.
Great. Well, thank you. The other question I've got, we'll just bat around on email and maybe do another session. But so that's been fantastic. Thank you very much. Been very clear and very helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I hope that's helped also. And for many people, this would be divided into two things, so that there would be like a group call that we do, which is a group debrief because a lot of times we do a whole bunch of brain imaging sessions at once as part of a conference or something like that, or we just gather up the stray people from the past month, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna have a group debrief. And that's where we go over a number of the things we did today. And then the more personalized feedback to answer those specific questions is then part of like a 1 hour call. So I wouldn't say, if you really were to go from A to Z in for the person without a group debrief, 90 minutes of what we've done is probably what you need. But if it's just the group debrief plus this, the group debrief is an hour and that covers a lot of people. And then the follow-up is going to be like 45 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, just from like okay, now I will do this little stop recording. Wow, I didn't expect to interface to do that. Okay.